Hello.
Hello.
We're about to have two Newscast Electioncast milestones.
Oh, yeah.
Number one, your first broadcast from a pub beer garden.
Yeah, that's right. Certainly on Newscast, as far as I can recall. I don't think I've been in a pub beer garden before.
I mean, I'm impressed you've got all your work done and you've clocked off already this early. Not true, by the way, not true. Many more hours of work still to go. Anyway, the second milestone is we're about to unveil the new Newscast election-themed opening title montage.
Ooh, are we? I'm excited about this. My ears are peeled towards listening intently on my headphones so I can hear it.
Shall I give you a little bit of a briefing of the creative direction in which we've gone?
Oh, please do. Yes, I'd love that.
So, still got the classic Newscast music.
Good.
Still got the classic newscast format of having lots of clips that together are quite funny.
Good.
But none of the clips are of politicians.
Oh.
They're all either of friends of the podcast, members of the Newscast family, or just normal voting people.
Well, I was going to say you're going to test me as to who they all are.
Well, no, because you haven't met them all. You haven't met literally every voter in Britain.
No, but your quizzes are never, or not always, entirely fair. So,
Anyway, I've given it such a big build-up. Let's now just reveal the new Newscast election-themed opening titles you will hear every day for the next 6 weeks.
Newscast from the BBC.
People do call me for short Jenny Let.
Polling day will be on Thursday, the 4th of July.
No way.
Thank God, about time.
It's going to be a very long 6 weeks.
I was wringing my underpants out, standing in Downing Street.
Campaigns can feel very long, and you voters can be a volatile bunch.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And it's Chris in a pub beer garden in Oxted in Surrey. And I reckon, Adam, you win from that little montage with your no way. I like that.
Well, what's weird is that was me reacting to you breaking the news to me on Friday that Michael Gove was not going to stand as a candidate in this election. But now it sounds like me being incredulous about the date of the election, which actually we all kind of were.
Totally. No, we were, weren't we? And the strange thing is, here we are on sort of bank holiday Monday evening as we record, and it sort of seems ages ago, last Wednesday, doesn't it? It sort of seems ancient history, but it's less than a week ago. Less than a week ago, I don't know what we were talking about on Newscast, but we weren't talking about the general election campaign being underway a matter of 48 hours later.
No, we were going to talk about inflation falling really fast and nearly hitting the 2% target, which is the reason we're having the election in the first place. Now, you're having a much more classic bank holiday than me, because I'm sat in this air-conditioned studio with my laptop and you're sat in a pub beer garden. But you're not slacking, because the name Oxted rings a bell to me, because it's where Keir Starmer grew up.
Yes, that is right. So we are here because earlier on, Keir Starmer was in Lancing in Sussex on the south coast. Again, another classic spot to spend a bank holiday Monday in the sunshine. But he was doing a speech, Adam, that was basically sort of the Keir Starmer, the man. Who am I? What am I all about? That's what he was trying to take on this morning. For assiduous followers of politics, and I know newscasters, many are exactly that, there was plenty that was pretty familiar, but it is a classic of a political campaign that you perfectly sensibly, as a political leader, and they're all doing this, sort of recap and go back over stuff that you might have said plenty of times before for people who are only just starting to pay attention. So there was quite a bit in this speech from Keir Starmer today about him and where he grew up. And you may just be familiar with that line about a Pebbledash semi in Surrey, on the Kent-Surrey border, in a village called Hurst Green. Well, that is where I am right now. And said Pebbledash semi is about 300 or 400 yards, if that, from this very beer garden.
And what did people think about you turning up to see this now quite famous address that until recently wasn't famous at all?
You know what? It's perfectly reasonably, one or two people around here might be a little weary about the arrival of journalists like me poking about and waving a camera about, because they've seen it all before for quite a while. So I am grateful for the sort of forbearance of the locals here who are perhaps well used to and a bit tired of seeing folk like me turning up. So thank you for putting up with us, and indeed any more of us who might turn up in the next couple of weeks or months. Because it must be a little tiresome having to put up with us lots, and I got a little flavour of that sentiment, and it is entirely understandable. So thank you to people here for putting up with us lot as a reporter bunch yet again.
I thought the kind of the backstory stuff in the speech, which was sort of what the first like 20% of the speech. It wasn't the whole thing. It was like the first 20%, I would guess. Although if you were now to do a check on a Word document, it'd probably not be that. But anyway, that's my guess. The thing that struck me was that, well, A, they were having to do it again. So clearly they think that the Keir Starmer backstory has not sunk in sufficiently to the public's consciousness yet. I mean, understandable, because as you were saying, people don't follow these things as closely as we do for our jobs. Second of all, the interesting thing was that the injection of a real kind of like bit of rurality to it. So I hadn't realised quite how kind of countryside-ish the place he grew up is. I knew about the Pebbledash semi. I knew the story about worrying about the bills coming in and his mum and dad having to decide to just not pay the phone bill one time because that was the service they could live without. But I didn't know the whole thing about like, oh, when he played football, they were sharing the pitch with cows.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That it's funny. I was rereading today Tom Baldwin's biography of Keir Starmer. Tom Baldwin, who used to work for the Times, and then he went to be director of communications for Ed Miliband, and he's written a biography of Keir Starmer, which is sort of broadly sympathetic. I think it would be fair to say, and Tom Baldwin is as a former employee of the Labour Party, and he describes, I don't have the exact phrase in front of me, so apologies to Tom if I'm not quite quoting him entirely word for word accurately here, but he describes around here as being almost as indistinct as some elements of how Keir Starmer is sometimes portrayed. In other words, not urban, but not rural either. You know, we're not far from the M25, we're not far from London, we're in Surrey on the borders of Kent. So, yeah, I mean, it is definitely far more rural than the kind of label and caricature that is sometimes hung around Keir Starmer by his opponents when he's described as sort of lefty lawyer from North London. There's definitely a contrast there. And Keir Starmer today described this as he sees it, pretty much quintessentially English. And it got me thinking, Adam, that, you know, people who seek to govern, seek to represent us, seek to somehow, don't they, however imperfectly, personify the country that they want to lead. And we had a bit of that, I think, from Keir Starmer today, talking about, well, this place, basically, and where he came from, trying to, if you like, paint a picture of what he's all about and what made him, as he sees it, the man that he is, as well as the, if you like, the North London thing, the constituency thing, you know, where he now lives and represents in Parliament, and indeed some of those kind of labels that some of his opponents will seek to throw around his neck that might sort of, you know, lean into that kind of metropolitan detachment thing that goes with sort of being seen to be from and representing North London, and that whole thing around London being somewhere that in many senses, because of that sort of sense that it's a sort of, I don't know, a world city that happens to be our national capital, might be atypical of the wider UK.
And then later on, you did an interview with him, and I had to laugh. Just to be clear, I wasn't laughing at your interview because it was a very good interview and there's lots of interesting things that we'll talk about in a second. But the actual setting for the interview, like the main camera shot, was you and him in a room where there was Union Jack bunting hanging up on the walls. It looked like you were leaning against a bar in like a sort of traditional pub, and then you could see there was like quirky mugs and floral wallpaper. It was almost like you were like a sort of in a Middle England theme park.
Yeah, no, totally. It was there was Union flags absolutely everywhere. Funnily enough, we saw a kind of cardboard box that had a Union flag written on it as part of the kind of paraphernalia of election campaigns that the various party leaders, you know, will carry around to kind of helped create the staging and choreography of these kind of events. And there was a bit of a concern as they were sort of setting up the spot where I did the interview, and various other journalist reporters did their interviews too, because one of the shots kind of, I think, showed some of the kind of bars on the window, the kind of security of they're just to sort of protect this sort of village hall in Lancing on the coast in Sussex. And I think there were some of the minders were a bit worried that it might have, I don't know, looked like a prison or whatever. And it gives you some sense actually of the kind of attention to detail. I mean, maybe bordering on sort of kind of paranoia, but perhaps understandable from their perspective in the Labour campaign, that they are absolutely conscious of everything at the moment. You might remember that photo the other day that was doing the rounds and led to some teasing of Rishi Sunak, where he was photographed on his plane the other day when he was dashing around all corners of the UK, and there was an exit sign behind him, which is one of those, I mean, it seems quite trite and trivial and whatever, but those sort of images kind of matter, and political kind of campaigns are always conscious about, what is the backdrop behind their leader. My goodness, Labour are really, really conscious of that at the moment, not leaving anything to chance, trying to avoid any kind of unforced errors that either sort of knock them off their campaigning stride or allow people to sort of tease and take the mick. I mean, some might, not particularly like the sort of abundance of union flags, but it's something that Labour and Keir Starmer absolutely sort of leaning into to try and counter that perception that's perhaps hung around Labour under its previous leadership under Jeremy Corbyn, that they, weren't keen to be seen to be patriotic. And that's something that absolutely Keir Starmer is very keen to, describing this place as kind of essentially English, but then also wrapping himself and surrounding himself in those union flags to do that wider kind of UK patriotism thing.
So that was the look of the interview. Let's talk about the content now. A few things that jumped out at me from it. First of all, his unapologetic adoption of the label socialist. And that makes me think a few things. Okay, there have been times when socialist has been the word that's been used for the Labour Party, that's been applied to them to criticise them and to make people maybe be a bit scared of them. Then there's the fact that actually lots of people within the Labour Party would say that Keir Starmer used to be a socialist and he's rejected socialism to get to where he is now. So actually, it's not like a simple word.
It isn't a simple word, and it's a word that comes with a certain amount of, I mean, some people would obviously attach a pride to it. Others would regard it with a certain scorn. And certainly Keir Starmer's political opponents use that word, the S word, negatively. And so it's interesting because when I put the question to him, I thought, I know he's used the word to describe himself before, but will he do in an election campaign when you're 5 and a bit weeks away from polling day, less than that for people who have a postal vote? Will there be any kind of, I don't know, ducking and diving, shilly-shallying around the use of that word? There wasn't. He answered it directly. He said yes. He described himself as a progressive. He tried to explain and define his own label, like his own use of that word, socialist, to say it was about, as he puts it, being in the service of working people. I think that was the phrase that he used. But yeah, I put that direct question to him and he did give a direct answer.
And then where there was less of a direct answer, at least that's my interpretation of it, maybe you'll say differently, was when you did a follow-up Laura Kuenssberg question about tax policy. So yesterday, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, had very explicitly on Laura's Sunday show said a Labour government would not put up rates of income tax or national insurance for the entire duration of the next Parliament if they win. You then asked the same kind of question but about VAT. What did you make of his answer?
So it seemed like a direct answer, but there was probably a little bit of wriggle room. So he said in his answer that they had costed all of their plans for their manifesto, which we haven't seen yet. It'll come in the next few weeks or so. And that didn't require the need to put up any taxes. Now, of course, that doesn't quite mean the same as VAT wouldn't go up at all. And we know some specific VAT will go up because, for instance, their idea of putting VAT on private school fees would be a particular element of VAT that would change, because at the moment it's not charged on private school fees. But I was asking him about the main rate of VAT, the stuff that's on pretty much everything, save for those things that are VAT exempt. And he said it wasn't part of the plans that they need, that they are going to unveil in their manifesto, the ideas that they will set out in terms of their spending commitments and their tax plans. So it was pretty much a direct answer, but with a little bit of wriggle room about, I guess around, circumstances changing in the future if Labour win and then they're in government and then stuff happens that makes that a necessity. Now, that's happened, hasn't it, since the last general election with the Conservatives, because we've seen the pandemic and we've seen what's happened with the war in Ukraine and the effect on energy bills and all that kind of stuff, and the kind of response that the government's had to manage since then. So I think it was kind of a straightforward answer, at least a straightforward answer in how he wanted to frame it, but there was a little bit of wriggle room there, I reckon.
Right, let's talk about the Conservative campaign now. And while all that was happening and you were checking out Keir Starmer's old Pebbledash semi, Rishi Sunak was in Buckinghamshire. There's some footage of him dribbling a ball around some cones. I actually thought he was doing not too badly, but that's because he did that way better than the time I had to do it with Peter Crouch, and it was a disaster. Other people are saying he has not been doing it that well. But anyway, we'll put that to one side. Can I give you my...
I didn't know you played football with Peter Crouch.
Yeah, one day when I was on Newsround and I was going to see the launch of the New England strip at that point, and it involved doing a load of skills training with Peter Crouch. And when I did the dribbling...
I've got to see this footage at some time.
It's locked away in a vault somewhere, never to be seen. And I mean, the problem is, though, once I did it once, and I did that whole dribbling around the cones, Peter Crouch, to his credit, then said, "Do you want me to take your turn for you the next time?" And I was like, "Yes, please." Anyway, that's enough about me. Back to the people that want to be prime ministers. Can I give you my theory about the Conservative election campaign over the last few days?
Go for it.
I know this is based on very little evidence because this is the first full week. So this theory will probably be blown out of the water. I don't know, maybe as soon as tomorrow. But I'm wondering if the Conservatives have looked at the modern way people consume politics and the news, and have they potentially ditched the old school election thing of having a new announcement, a new thing every day, so a different sort of top line, as we would call it in the journalistic trade, and actually have they decided that you maybe need a couple of days for a policy idea to sink in, and that's why today they had a second day of talking about their national service policy rather than just blitzing us with something new today?
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? I wonder, is it because it's a bank holiday weekend and perhaps they conclude that perhaps people, are doing other stuff and aren't scrolling through the apps and the social media feeds and listening to the telly and podcasts and radio as much as they might do the rest of the time? Is it because there is a finite amount of new policy that people are going to announce, political parties are going to announce in a general election? The Conservatives will make the point that they have actually announced a new policy, which we didn't get from Keir Starmer today, and that was part of the Conservative critique of Keir Starmer. Rishi Sunak saying that he'd spent half an hour saying absolutely nothing, was the criticism from Keir Starmer. I think from Rishi Sunak's perspective, the Conservatives' perspective, yes, over the weekend, or at least on Sunday, it still is the weekend, isn't it? Doesn't feel like it, but that's on the campaign trail. I'm not complaining, but to kind of remind myself it's a bank holiday today. James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, was talking to Laura, wasn't he, yesterday, on her programme on BBC One about this idea of national service, but it was the first time we'd heard the Prime Minister talking about it and talking to reporters about it and doing that football thing. I agree with you. I thought he was pretty good. There was one little bit, I think some people have been teasing him on social media where he maybe lost his footing a little bit, but that whole business of dribbling between the cones thing, that's not easy, is it? And it's the nature of a general election campaign, and clearly people who are in public life and seek high office are scrutinised to the nth degree, and that's, I guess, how it should be in a democracy, with all of the power that a Prime Minister either re-elected or a newer Prime Minister elected manages to assume. But my goodness, when the cameras are on you every minute of the day, it's pretty unforgiving, particularly when you're doing stuff like playing football or whatever else it might be that other leaders get up to in the coming days. But yeah, I think the Conservative aim today was to sort of double down on this national service idea, try and explain why they think it is a good one. Anne-Marie Trevelyan, who is a minister who was out and about earlier on Monday, didn't have answers to some kind of key questions, really, like where would those who sign up to serve in the military for their national service live? Would you have to build loads more barracks? Now, the argument from the Conservatives is that they would have a royal commission, as it's known. In other words, a big old process of trying to work out how on earth this would work, and that would take some time. There would be piloting that would start in 2025. It would take much of the next Parliament, in other words, the next 5 years, for them to get to the place where this whole thing was up and running. And they think it's all about trying to bring people together, take people out of their sort of silos and bubbles, digital or real, and lots of people from lots of different backgrounds mixing, whether in the military or in other elements of public service, the emergency services or cyber or whatever it might be. I think the broader strategy, Adam, from the Conservatives is to try and make a splash in these early weeks of the campaign, because even though they're the incumbents, when you look at the opinion polls, they are the challengers, aren't they, in this election? Labour are widely seen as the favourites to win when you look at the opinion polls. So they're trying to grab attention and perhaps, take a few risks, grab the conversation, seize the conversation. I think we will get, by the way, a couple of new policies, or at least policy announcements. Let's see how new they are when they come from the Conservatives in the next 24 hours and also in the next 48 hours. I don't know what they are yet, but I think we will. I think that's what's likely to happen.
The thing is, though, if you don't give the hyperactive political press pack a new announcement or something new to get their teeth into, they go looking for trouble elsewhere. I mean, that's journalists' jobs, is to lift up stones and see what's there. And the things they've been finding today is a lot of ill discipline and quite a lot of criticism of Rishi Sunak from his own side. So, for example, you had Zach Goldsmith, Lord Goldsmith, Conservative peer, who's been disgruntled for a while now, having a massive go at him, saying, oh, he's just biding his time till he packs his bags and goes off to California. You then got Steve Baker, who, Conservative candidate, but still a Conservative minister in the Northern Ireland Department, saying, hang on, if us ministers have been consulted about this national service policy, we maybe would have tweaked it a bit. For example, it's got potential obvious difficulties, the military bit, for people who live in Northern Ireland. And then you've got somebody who until last week was a Conservative MP, not standing this election, endorsing the Reform candidate in her seat. So there's been quite a lot of incoming from the Prime Minister's own side.
Yeah, that's right. Technically speaking, Adam, I can't quite believe I'm picking you up here potentially on a sort of technicality, given your famed, detailed, binders from the Brexitcast era and all the rest of it. But even though Parliament is no longer sitting, it hasn't yet completely done technically. So actually, I think until Thursday, MPs are still MPs.
Oh, really? I thought we'd crossed that threshold already.
No, I don't think we have.
Okay.
I don't know. You're in possession of a sort of laptop and a connection to the internet here, whereas I'm not. So you might want to double check that. But I'm pretty sure there's a couple more days until Thursday where people who were elected in 2019 are still MPs, even if they are, well, either standing down or indeed.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Is that right?
I'm just going to do a search. When do MPs stop being MPs?
I think it's Thursday.
You are completely correct, and I am completely wrong. Although my summary of what people had said was completely accurate.
It was absolutely on the money and without blemish or caveat or incorrect detail. No, it's interesting. Both. I mean, it's extraordinary the contribution from Lucy Allen, the outgoing MP. For Telford, endorsing reform. I mean, that really is quite a thing for a Conservative MP, albeit with days left with that title, MP to go. Really, really quite something. Yeah, Steve Baker, the Northern Ireland Minister, making some less than entirely sort of on-message remarks about the national service idea. And yes, as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, and those remarks from Zach Goldsmith, the Prime Minister's been talking to Robert Peston on ITV News tonight and says that he's not going to California. He is proud to be based here and to have a future here, whatever the outcome of the election. Was talking about his beloved Southampton, who are returning to the Premier League, having beaten Leeds in the playoff final yesterday. And so he was saying, and I haven't got his exact words in front of me that he gave to ITV News, but the gist of it was, I'm not going anywhere regardless of what happens in the election. And there's plenty to be excited about, not least the football.
Newscast from the BBC.
Thanks to Adam and Chris, and a reminder that the Newscast team will be here every day during the election campaign. You can catch up if you miss an episode on BBC Sounds, or indeed you can watch it on the BBC iPlayer.